I emptied my life savings to buy a rundown gas station, abandoned since 1992. The day I signed the contract, my parents called me a fool. My brother-in-law laughed and told me I was a hopeless failure. But just 1 week later, what I uncovered in the storage room behind the convenience store left them all speechless. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family has treated me like the stepping stone to their success. The Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' estate in Buckhead was always a highly choreographed performance of wealth and status. My parents, Marcus and Vivian, had spent decades climbing the social ladder to secure their place among Atlanta's African-American elite. Their sprawling brick mansion, with its perfectly manicured lawns and towering columns, was a testament to their obsession with appearances. As I walked into the grand dining room, the air was thick with the scent of roasted turkey, expensive perfume, and absolute judgment. I was directed to take a seat at the far end of the massive marble table, practically brushing against the swinging doors of the kitchen. I was placed next to my teenage cousins rather than in the center with the adults. This was a deliberate choice. My family believed that proximity to power had to be earned, and in their eyes, I had just willingly thrown my entire life away. For 7 years, I had worked myself to the bone as a commercial real estate financial analyst. I generated millions in value for my corporate firm while simultaneously acting as the unpaid financial advisor for my entire family. I reviewed their portfolios, fixed their tax mistakes, and managed their assets. But the moment I experienced severe burnout and decided to step away to build something of my own, their conditional respect evaporated completely. I had drained $80,000, the absolute last of my savings, to purchase a dilapidated, rusty gas station on the industrial outskirts of the city. To me, it was a calculated risk based on property value trends. To my family, it was an unforgivable embarrassment that threatened their pristine country club image. The clinking of fine crystal interrupted the low hum of conversation. My older brother Jamal stood up at the center of the table, holding his champagne flute high. Jamal was a mid-level finance bro who wore bespoke suits he could barely afford, just to project an aura of immense wealth. He pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped the screen with a malicious grin. "Everyone, I would like to propose a very special toast," he announced, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let us raise our glasses to our very own Nia. She has officially transitioned from the corporate world to the highly lucrative field of pumping gas and selling stale hot dogs." He passed his phone to the person sitting next to him. On the screen was a photograph he had taken of my new property. The picture showed the crumbling roof, the overgrown weeds pushing through cracked concrete, and the rusted fuel pumps that had not seen a drop of gasoline since the early 90s. As the phone made its way around the table, polite smiles morphed into outright laughter. My younger sister Chloe, the undisputed golden child of the family, leaned over to look at the screen. Chloe was a luxury real estate agent who traded entirely on her looks and her connections. She wore a Chanel dress that likely cost more than my entire quarterly grocery budget. She tossed her long hair over her shoulder and let out a dramatic sigh. "Nia, you really outdid yourself this time," Chloe mocked, her eyes scanning my simple dark dress with familiar disdain. "I mean, we all knew you were struggling after you quit your job, but buying a roach-infested shack on the bad side of town is a new low even for you. Are you going to be wearing a name tag while you mop the floors?" The table erupted in laughter again. I kept my face completely neutral, staring straight ahead. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I had spent my entire life absorbing these targeted humiliations. I knew that reacting would only feed their narrative that I was overly sensitive and unstable. Then Bradley spoke up. Bradley was Chloe's husband, a 35-year-old white commercial real estate developer. My parents absolutely worshipped him. They viewed his presence in the family as the ultimate validation of their social climbing. Bradley loved playing the role of the wealthy benefactor while secretly using my family's African American status as a diversity token to easily secure municipal contracts from the city council. He leaned back in his custom dining chair, swirling his expensive scotch. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and slid it across the marble table toward me. The bill stopped right next to my water glass. "Take it," Nia Bradley said with a smug smile that made my stomach turn. "Consider it a charitable donation. You are going to need to buy a lot of bleach and a heavy-duty mop to clean up that disaster of a property. Honestly, it is embarrassing. You are dragging the family name through the mud. If you needed money that badly, you could have just asked me for a job fetching coffee at my firm." My mother, Vivian, immediately chimed in to support him. She reached out and patted Bradley on the arm before fixing me with a furious glare. "Nia, push that money back right now," she scolded, her voice sharp and unforgiving. "You should be ashamed of yourself for making Bradley feel like he has to hand out charity at our Thanksgiving table. Look at your sister. Bradley just helped her secure the commission on a multi-million-dollar penthouse. She married a man who elevates this family. You, on the other hand, cannot even maintain a respectable career. If you want to play convenience store clerk and ruin your life, fine, but do not bring that lower-class energy into this house." I sat completely still, looking at the $100 bill resting on the table. The sheer audacity of their performance was staggering. They had no idea why I bought that specific property, and their arrogant assumptions blinded them to anything beyond the rusted exterior. The conversation quickly shifted away from my supposed failure as Chloe eagerly reclaimed the spotlight. She began loudly detailing her upcoming luxury vacation. "Bradley is taking me to the Maldives for 2 weeks next month," she bragged, holding up her wrist to display a new diamond bracelet. "We are staying in one of those overwater bungalows with a private slide straight into the ocean. We just have to celebrate." Bradley finally got the city approval for the Oasis mega development. It is going to be a billion-dollar mixed-use commercial space. It is going to completely change the city skyline and put us in an entirely different tax bracket. My father, Marcus, beamed with pride, puffing out his chest. He was a man who measured his self-worth entirely by the financial success of those around him. "That is my son-in-law," Marcus declared, raising his glass toward Bradley. "Generational wealth is what we are building here. The Oasis project is going to be the crown jewel of Atlanta. And Vivian and I are incredibly proud to be part of the foundation. We are partners in this empire." The words caught my immediate attention. My background in financial analysis made my ears ring at the casual drop of the word partners. I set my fork down and looked directly at my father. "What do you mean you are partners in the foundation?" I asked, my voice cutting through the celebratory chatter. "I thought Bradley secured independent venture capital for his projects." Chloe rolled her eyes and let out an exasperated breath. "God, Nia, you are so out of the loop. Bradley needed to secure a massive commercial loan to cover the initial excavation and zoning permits. The banks were being ridiculously strict about liquidity requirements. So Mom and Dad agreed to co-sign the loan using the estate and their retirement portfolios as collateral. It is just a temporary formality until the international investors release their funds next quarter." My heart genuinely stopped beating for a second. I looked from Chloe to my parents in absolute horror. The Oasis project was a massive speculative development that had been stalled in city planning for over 3 years. Using a primary residence and retirement funds as collateral for a commercial excavation loan was not just risky, it was financial suicide. The banks only asked for that level of personal collateral when they believed the corporate entity was severely overleveraged. "Dad, you cannot be serious," I said, my professional instincts overriding my decision to stay silent. "You leveraged this house and your retirement for a high-risk commercial development loan. If the Oasis project faces any zoning delays, or if the investors pull out, the bank can foreclose on everything you own. Bradley is a developer. He should have corporate assets to back his own loans. Why is he using your personal wealth to absorb his corporate risk?" The dining room fell dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped completely. Marcus turned dark with rage. The veins in his neck bulged as he slammed his fist onto the marble table, rattling the crystal glasses. "How dare you!" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You sit there with a failing gas station to your name, and you have the audacity to lecture me about high-level real estate investments. I have spent 30 years building my wealth. Bradley is managing $1 billion project. He understands capital leverage in ways your tiny little mind cannot even comprehend." Bradley immediately played the victim. He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples, and looking at my parents with an expression of profound disappointment. "Marcus, Vivian." "I apologize," he said, his tone dripping with fake sincerity. "I should have known Nia would try to undermine my success. It is classic projection. She is failing in her own life, so she has to find imaginary flaws in my business model to make herself feel better. I would never put your home at risk. The funding is perfectly secure. She is just trying to cause division because she is jealous of Chloe." My mother, Vivian, practically leaped out of her chair to defend him. She pointed a trembling finger, perfectly manicured with French tips, right at my face. "You are a bitter, jealous little girl," Vivian screamed. "We allowed you to come to this dinner out of pity, and this is how you repay us. By accusing my son-in-law of financial mismanagement. Bradley is family. He is providing for your sister and elevating our status in this community. You are nothing but a disappointment who throws away every opportunity handed to you." I looked at Jamal, expecting my brother to possess at least enough financial sense to see the danger. But Jamal just scoffed and shook his head. "Give it a rest, Nia. You are embarrassing yourself. You do not understand macroeconomics. Go back to worrying about whether your gas pumps work and leave the real money to the professionals." I looked around the table at the faces of the people who were supposed to be my family. They were completely blinded by Bradley's white privilege and the illusion of his immense wealth. They were eagerly walking into a financial slaughterhouse and attacking the only person trying to warn them. The golden child dynamic was so deeply entrenched that they would rather risk homelessness than admit their perfect son-in-law was using them. "Get out," Marcus ordered, pointing toward the grand foyer. "I will not have you poisoning the celebration with your toxic energy. Leave this table, Nia. Go back to your rusted shack and do not come back until you are ready to apologize to Bradley and your sister." I did not argue. I calmly stood up from the table, smoothed the front of my dress, and picked up my purse. I left the $100 bill sitting exactly where Bradley had placed it. I walked out of the dining room, through the grand foyer, and out the heavy oak front doors, into the freezing, pouring rain. I got into my car and drove away from the mansion, heading straight toward the industrial outskirts of the city. I pulled up to my gas station. The rain beat down on the sagging aluminum roof. I unlocked the front door of the convenience store and walked to the back office. Frustrated and cold, I grabbed a hammer and started tearing down the rotting drywall behind the counter. My hammer suddenly broke through a false wall, striking solid metal. I cleared the debris, revealing a heavy steel security door sealed shut with a rusted padlock. I grabbed a crowbar and snapped the lock. I pushed the heavy door open and shined my flashlight into the darkness. It was a climate-sealed storage vault, and what I saw perfectly preserved under the dust made me drop the flashlight in absolute shock. The flashlight hit the concrete floor with a loud clatter, but the beam remained steady. It illuminated a massive, cavernous space completely hidden from the outside world. I picked the flashlight back up, my hands trembling as the beam swept across the room. This was not a dump. This was a custom-built, climate-controlled vault. The air inside was dry and cool, completely unaffected by the humidity and rot that had destroyed the main building. I saw the pristine cardboard boxes. I saw the sealed glass display cases. I saw the untouched arcade cabinets lined up against the concrete wall. The previous owner, an eccentric recluse who passed away suddenly in the early 90s, had not abandoned his belongings. He had sealed them away. He had protected them. He had preserved them for a future he never lived to see. Row upon row of heavy-duty steel shelving stretched up to the 20-foot ceiling. I walked over to the nearest shelf and carefully pulled down a box. The label on the side made my breath catch in my throat. It read, Nike Air Jordan 7, Original release 1992. The box was sealed in a protective plastic sleeve. I moved to the next shelf and the next. There were hundreds of them, dozens of colorways, all perfectly preserved. My heart pounded against my ribs as I realized I was looking at a museum-quality collection of sneaker history. But the shoes were just the beginning. The center of the room was dominated by bulky shapes draped in heavy canvas tarps. I pulled one of the tarps away, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Beneath it sat a row of mint-condition classic arcade cabinets. Street Fighter II, Mortal Kombat, NBA Jam. They looked as if they had just rolled off the factory line. Against the far wall, glass display cases held sports memorabilia that would make any collector weep. Rookie cards, signed jerseys, championship rings, all perfectly encased and protected from the elements. I stumbled backward, my mind racing to calculate the sheer value of what I was looking at. In my days as a financial analyst, I had seen wealthy clients drop hundreds of thousands of dollars on a single vintage item. This room held hundreds of them. I had emptied my meager savings account to buy a rusted gas station and inadvertently purchased a multi-million-dollar time capsule. I thought about Jamal laughing at my rusted fuel pumps. I thought about Chloe mocking my dark dress. I thought about Bradley sliding a $100 bill across the marble table. I thought about my mother demanding I accept the humiliation. They called me a failure. They called me a disappointment. They called me a burden. But this room was not a failure. This room was a goldmine. Yet the most valuable item in the room was not made of leather or glass or rare electronics. It was made of paper. In the far corner of the vault, sitting entirely alone, sat a heavy oak desk. On top of it lay a thick manila folder covered in a heavy layer of dust. I wiped the dust away and opened the cover. Inside were the original zoning blueprints and property deeds for the gas station dating back to 1992. I spread the thick parchment documents out under the flashlight beam, my analytical training immediately taking over. I traced the property lines. I read the dense legal jargon. I scanned the archaic municipal codes. And then a specific clause caught my eye. It was an easement agreement. The gas station property sat at the very edge of a massive 500-acre plot of undeveloped land. According to the original deed, the gas station held the exclusive ingress and egress easement rights for that entire 500 acres. That meant the only legally recognized access road to the massive plot of land behind my property ran directly through my gas station. Without my explicit written permission, no vehicle, no construction equipment, and no utility line could legally cross my property line to access the land behind it. I read the clause 3 times to make sure I was not hallucinating. I read the legal coordinates. I read the surveyor notes. I read the absolute permanence of the language. The legal language was ironclad. The paranoid previous owner had secured this easement to prevent corporate developers from building a bypass road around his business. He had effectively created a legal chokehold on the largest piece of undeveloped commercial real estate in the entire county. And now that chokehold belonged to me. I sat down heavily in the leather desk chair, my mind spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. The 500-acre plot behind my gas station was not just any piece of land. It was the exact location where my arrogant brother-in-law Bradley was planning to build his billion-dollar Oasis mega-development. The same development he had bragged about at the Thanksgiving dinner table. The same project he had illegally leveraged my parents' mansion and retirement funds to secure. Bradley and his high-priced corporate surveyors must have completely missed the easement clause because it was paper-based in 1992 and improperly digitized by a lazy county clerk decades ago. They assumed the abandoned gas station was just a minor eyesore they could easily ignore. They had no idea that they could not move a single piece of heavy machinery onto their billion-dollar construction site without driving right through my property. And they certainly had no idea that I held the ultimate legal authority to deny them access permanently. A commercial project of that magnitude required immediate groundbreaking to satisfy the bridge loans my parents had co-signed. Without an access road, the city would not issue a demolition permit. Bradley was legally dead in the water. I looked around the vault, taking in the millions of dollars in vintage merchandise and the priceless legal documents in my hands. Just hours ago, my family had laughed in my face. They had worshipped a white developer who was using them as disposable collateral while treating me like dirt. They told me I had no right to speak. They told me I did not understand real money. They told me I was dragging the family name through the mud. They wanted me to be small. They wanted me to be silent. They wanted me to be exactly what they told me I was. But sitting in that vault, holding the key to Bradley's total destruction, a deep sense of clarity washed over me. I was not small. I was not silent. I was holding the detonator to their entire fake empire. I folded the blueprint carefully and placed it back into the manila folder. I picked up my flashlight and turned toward the heavy steel door. The golden child and the arrogant savior were about to learn a very painful lesson about corporate leverage. I did not waste a single second. Early the next morning, I contacted Julian, a former colleague who now worked as a senior appraiser for the Sotheby's auction house in New York. I told him I had a substantial private collection of vintage sportswear and memorabilia that needed an immediate and highly discreet evaluation. When he and his team of 3 specialists arrived at the gas station 2 days later, under the cover of darkness, their professional composure completely shattered. Julian stepped through the breached drywall into the climate-controlled vault and actually had to lean against the steel doorframe to steady himself. He was staring at the rows of perfectly sealed 1985 Air Jordans. They spent 12 straight hours cataloging, photographing, and authenticating every single item in that room. They wore white cotton gloves and spoke in hushed, reverent tones as they uncovered mint-condition arcade cabinets and unopened boxes of rookie trading cards. By dawn, Julian pulled me aside. His hands were physically shaking as he handed me the preliminary inventory report. The collection was conservatively estimated at $4.5 million in liquid auction value. The auction house was so desperate to secure the exclusive rights to this unprecedented sale that Julian bypassed standard protocol. He offered me an immediate cash advance of $2 million while the formal auction was being organized. I signed the paperwork on the hood of his rental car without a shred of hesitation. The funds hit my private account before noon that very same day. I had gone from having absolutely nothing to my name to being a multimillionaire in less than 72 hours. I sat alone in the rusted-out shell of the convenience store, staring at the 7-figure balance glowing on my phone screen. Anyone else would have packed a bag, bought a first-class ticket to a tropical island, and never looked back. But I knew my family. I knew their twisted metrics for human value. $4.5 million was a staggering amount of money, but to people like my father and my brother-in-law Bradley, it was just a lottery ticket. They worshipped power control and leverage. Bradley was parading around Atlanta boasting about a billion-dollar mega development. A few million in shoe money would not earn my family's respect, and it certainly would not protect me from their relentless toxicity. They would just find a way to belittle my windfall, or worse, they would try to claim they were entitled to a portion of it. I needed something stronger than cash. I needed a weapon. I locked the heavy steel vault door and carried the dusty manila folder I had found on the oak desk back to my apartment. I cleared my small dining table, grabbed my architectural rulers, a set of highlighters, and a magnifying glass. For 7 years, I had been one of the top commercial real estate financial analysts in the city. I knew how to read between the lines of dense municipal codes and archaic property deeds better than anyone. I opened the folder and carefully spread the fragile parchment documents across the table. The documents dated back to 1992. The previous owner of the gas station was a paranoid man who fiercely protected his borders. I read through the original zoning blueprints, the surveyor notes, and the municipal property registrations. I cross-referenced the old land plots with current satellite imagery of the county. I spent 6 hours analyzing the legal coordinates, mapping out the exact boundaries of my small gas station property in relation to the vast empty wilderness directly behind it. And then I saw it. Buried deep within an addendum on the 7th page of the property deed was a specific legally binding clause. It was an ingress and egress easement agreement. My heart began to hammer against my ribs as I traced the surveyor lines with my highlighter. The gas station property sat at the very edge of a massive 500-acre plot of undeveloped land. That massive plot was completely surrounded by protected state forest on 3 sides and a steep, unbuildable ravine on the 4th. According to the original 1992 deed, my tiny rundown gas station held the exclusive ingress and egress easement rights for that entire 500 acres. That meant the only legally recognized access road to the massive plot of land behind my property ran directly through my gas station. I read the clause 3 times to make sure I was not hallucinating. The legal language was absolute and ironclad. It ran with the land, meaning it transferred to me the moment I signed the purchase agreement for the gas station. Without my explicit written permission, no vehicle, no construction equipment, and no utility line could legally cross my property line to access the 500 acres behind it. The previous owner had secured this easement to prevent corporate developers from building a bypass road around his business and starving him of customers. He had effectively created a legal chokehold on the largest piece of undeveloped commercial real estate in the entire county. And now that chokehold belonged entirely to me. I leaned back in my chair, my mind spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. I pulled up the city planning website on my laptop and searched for active commercial development permits in that specific zip code. The search results loaded, and the truth hit me with the force of a freight train. The 500-acre plot behind my gas station was not just any piece of land. It was the exact location where my arrogant white brother-in-law Bradley was planning to build his billion-dollar Oasis mega-development. The exact same development he had bragged about at the Thanksgiving dinner table while sliding a $100 bill across the marble to humiliate me. The exact same project he had illegally leveraged my parents' mansion and retirement funds to secure. Bradley and his high-priced corporate surveyors must have completely missed the easement clause because it was paper-based, filed in 1992, and improperly digitized by a lazy county clerk decades ago. They looked at the map, saw an abandoned gas station, and assumed it was just a minor eyesore they could easily ignore or bulldoze later. They had absolutely no idea that they could not move a single piece of heavy machinery onto their billion-dollar construction site without driving right through my property. And they certainly had no idea that I held the ultimate legal authority to deny them access permanently. A commercial project of that magnitude required immediate groundbreaking to satisfy the massive bridge loans my parents had co-signed. Without a legal access road, the city would never issue a single demolition permit. Bradley was legally dead in the water, and he did not even know it yet. I looked at the millions of dollars in my bank account, and then down at the fragile piece of paper that gave me the power to destroy a billionaire. My family thought I was a failure. They were about to learn a very painful lesson about leverage. I stared at the name printed clearly on the adjacent parcel boundaries drawn in the county surveyor's map. Oasis. The letters seemed to burn into my retinas. It was Bradley's crown jewel. It was the project he had shoved in my face at every family gathering. It was the project that made my parents mortgage their entire future just to be associated with his perceived greatness. The 500 acres of dense woods and uneven terrain sitting directly behind my gas station was the exact site of his billion-dollar mega-development. The sheer scale of his oversight was almost impossible to comprehend. How did a supposedly brilliant developer make such a catastrophic mistake? How did his army of corporate lawyers miss the single most important detail of the property line? I spent the next 3 hours cross-referencing the municipal databases with the physical deed in my hands. The answer was a perfect storm of bureaucratic incompetence and staggering arrogance. The 1992 easement clause was misfiled in the county archives. A lazy clerk decades ago had logged the physical paperwork under a completely different parcel block in the digital system. Bradley's high-priced corporate surveyors had only checked the online municipal records. They relied entirely on the digitized data. They never went into the basement of the records hall. They never pulled the physical archives. They never verified the original paper trails. They looked at a rusted, abandoned gas station and saw a minor inconvenience. They saw a property they could just bypass with a small bribe to City Hall or seize through eminent domain when the time was right. They did not know the law was already written. They did not know the legal boundaries were already set. They did not know the chokehold was already locked. Without my explicit written permission to pave an access road straight through my rusted fuel pumps, Bradley's billion-dollar project was completely landlocked. It was surrounded by state-protected conservation land on 3 sides. My property was the only legal entry point. Without an access road, the city would never issue the final grading permits. Without the grading permits, he could not move a single piece of heavy machinery onto the site. He could not pour concrete. He could not build. He was legally dead in the water. I needed absolute confirmation of his vulnerability. I needed to know exactly how much pressure he was under. I used a fraction of my $2 million cash advance to hire an elite private corporate investigator. I gave him Bradley's company name and told him to dig into the financials. I needed to see his permit applications. I needed to see his loan structures. I needed to see the exact timeline of his impending doom. The investigator delivered the encrypted dossier to my email within 48 hours. I sat at my small dining table reading through the files, and the sheer magnitude of Bradley's deception made my blood run cold. Bradley was not a titan of industry. He was a master manipulator running a highly sophisticated shell game. His development firm was severely over-leveraged and drowning in debt from previous failed projects. He had secured a massive high-interest bridge loan from a predatory private equity firm to fund the Oasis project. But the terms of that loan were terrifying. The private equity firm required immediate physical construction progress to maintain the funding. If Bradley did not officially break ground by the end of the month, the lenders had the right to call the loan entirely. To secure that toxic loan, Bradley had used his own wife's family as disposable collateral. He had convinced my father and my brother to transfer total control of their investment portfolios into his holding company. He had legally leveraged the deed to my parents' Buckhead mansion. If Bradley defaulted, my parents would lose their mansion. My brother would lose his entire life savings. They would lose their entire reality. They would be left completely destitute, while Bradley simply declared corporate bankruptcy and walked away untouched. He was willingly leading my family to financial slaughter. He was using their blind worship of his status to dig their graves. And they were too blinded by his expensive suits and country club memberships to see the knife at their throats. They had practically handed him the blade. I reread the investigator's report. I read the loan documents. I read the fraudulent collateral agreements. The numbers stared back at me, proving exactly what my family truly valued. They valued the illusion of wealth more than their own flesh and blood. They valued Bradley's empty promises more than my genuine warnings. They valued status more than survival. For my entire life, they had conditioned me to accept less. They demanded I shrink myself so my sister could shine. They demanded I stay quiet so my brother could speak. They demanded I apologize for simply existing in a space they believed belonged only to them. I had spent 30 years swallowing my pride. I had spent 30 years accepting their dismissal. I had spent 30 years playing the role of the forgotten daughter. That role was officially retired. Now the deadline was rapidly approaching. Bradley's construction managers were undoubtedly warning him that the city was blocking their permits. They were telling him they needed an access route. Bradley was panicking. He needed my land. He needed my dirt. He needed my cracked pavement. But his ego would never allow him to approach me directly. He would never lower himself to negotiate with the woman he had just publicly humiliated at the Thanksgiving table. A cornered animal always sends its most loyal pawns to do its dirty work. He would use the people who had always controlled me. He would use the people who had always deemed me worthless. My cell phone buzzed violently against the table, breaking the silence of my apartment. I looked at the screen. It was a text message from my mother, Vivian. The timing was perfectly predictable. The message was clipped, demanding, and utterly devoid of warmth. She wrote that we needed to talk about my property. She wrote that she and my father were coming to the gas station this afternoon. She told me not to make them wait outside in that terrible neighborhood. She told me they had spoken with Bradley and found a solution to my financial embarrassment. I smiled at the glowing screen. A cold, mechanical smile that did not reach my eyes. They were coming to save me. They were coming to rescue me from my rusted mistake. They were coming to offer me a few scraps of cash to hand over the very weapon that was pointed directly at their own heads. They did not know I had millions in an offshore account. They did not know I had an appraiser cataloging a fortune in vintage assets. They did not know I held the original 1992 deed in my hands. They thought they were dealing with a desperate failure. They thought I would fold under their pressure just like I always did. They were driving straight into a trap, and I was going to let the steel jaws snap shut. The silver Mercedes pulled into the cracked, weed-choked parking lot of the gas station, followed closely by a sleek black Range Rover. I stood behind the dusty glass of the convenience store window, watching them step out. My father Marcus emerged first, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit and looking around the decaying property with thinly veiled disgust. My mother Vivian followed, wearing designer sunglasses and carrying a handbag worth more than the rusted fuel pumps she was standing next to. From the Range Rover, my sister Chloe and my brother Jamal stepped onto the broken asphalt. They looked like a wealthy family touring a disaster zone. I pushed open the glass door and walked out to meet them. I wore faded jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, deliberately playing the part of the struggling broke daughter they expected to see. "Nia, darling," my mother called out. Her voice was dripping with an artificial sweetness that immediately made my skin crawl. She walked over and actually hugged me. It was a stiff, performative gesture. "We have been so worried about you out here in this awful place." I did not flinch. "I am fine, Mom. Why is everyone here?" My father stepped forward. He put on his best paternal business face, the one he used when he was about to close a deal. "We are here because we are family, and family looks out for each other. We know you made a rash decision emptying your savings for this property. We know you must be drowning right now." So we spoke to Bradley. Hearing his name, I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. "Bradley," I asked, keeping my voice perfectly innocent. "What does Bradley have to do with this?" Chloe stepped up, resting a manicured hand on her hip. "Bradley is trying to save you, Nia. He sees what a massive mistake you made. He knows you cannot afford to renovate this dump, and he feels terrible that you are going to go bankrupt. So he is offering to buy it from you out of his own pocket just to bail you out." Jamal nodded, pulling a thick legal envelope from his jacket. "It is an incredibly generous offer, Nia. Bradley does not even need this land. He is just going to pave it over and use it as an overflow parking lot for the construction crews working on Oasis. He is basically treating it as a charitable donation to keep you out of financial ruin." My father took the envelope from Jamal and pulled out a crisp contract. "He is offering you $150,000 cash. Today. You sign the transfer deed right now and the money goes straight into your account. You walk away with your original investment plus a nice little profit. You get a clean slate. $150,000 for a property that controlled the only legal access to a billion-dollar mega development." The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Bradley was backed into a corner. His lenders were breathing down his neck. He was days away from defaulting on his massive bridge loans and losing my parents' mansion in the process. He absolutely needed my land to survive. Yet he had sent his loyal pawns to stand in my parking lot and frame his desperate survival tactic as an act of pity. They were looking at me with expectant, greedy eyes. They wanted me to fall to my knees and thank them. They wanted me to sign away my kingdom for a handful of pennies so they could go back to worshipping their golden son-in-law. The sickening manipulation of it all settled deep into my bones. 150,000, I repeated slowly, looking down at the contract in my father's hands. "That is very specific. And you are sure Bradley does not actually need the property for the Oasis project? Just parking?" "Of course not," my mother scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "His project is massive, Nia. It is a billion-dollar development. Your little gas station is completely irrelevant to his blueprints. He is doing a favor for your father and me because he loves this family." "Exactly," Chloe chimed in, crossing her arms. "You should be thanking him. You are standing in a toxic wasteland. Nobody else is ever going to buy this dirt from you. If you turn this down, you are going to be stuck paying property taxes on a dead asset until the bank forecloses on you. Do not be stubborn and ruin the one lifeline you have left. I looked at Chloe. She was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet paid for by the very fraud Bradley was committing against our parents. She was so desperate to maintain her status as the wealthy developer's wife that she was actively helping him steal from her own sister. I need to read it over, I said, crossing my arms. I cannot just sign a property transfer on the hood of a car. The fake smiles instantly vanished. The generous saviors disappeared, and the true venomous nature of my family clawed its way right back to the surface. Read it over, my father barked, his face turning red. What is there to read, Naya? It is a standard quitclaim deed. We brought a notary public waiting in the car. You sign it and you take the money. You are in no position to play hardball. Dad is right, Jamal sneered, taking a step closer to intimidate me. You do not know the first thing about commercial real estate. You are a failed analyst. Bradley is handing you a golden ticket and you are trying to be difficult just for the sake of causing drama. Sign the paper. I looked at the contract again. I could see the bold print at the top. It explicitly included the transfer of all attached easement and access rights. Bradley's lawyers had drafted it perfectly. If I signed, my signature would instantly unlock his landlocked 500 acres. No, I said, my voice dropping to a flat, icy tone. I am not signing anything today. My mother gasped, stepping forward and jabbing a manicured finger at my chest. You ungrateful brat. We drive all the way out to this ghetto to pull you out of the gutter, and this is how you repay us. You are jeopardizing Bradley's goodwill. If you do not sign this right now, he is going to pull the offer entirely. Then tell him to pull it, I replied, staring directly into her angry eyes. Tell Bradley I said no. Chloe threw her hands up in the air, turning back toward the Range Rover. I told you this was a waste of time. She wants to be a failure. Let her rot out here. Bradley is going to have the city seize this dump through eminent domain anyway. He told me he has the mayor on speed dial. You are going to end up with nothing, Nia. I almost laughed. Eminent domain took years of public hearings and litigation. Bradley's bridge loans defaulted in less than 30 days. He did not have years. He did not even have weeks. My father snatched the contract back, shoving it into the envelope. You have exactly 24 hours to stop acting like a petulant child and come to your senses. If you do not bring this signed document to our house by tomorrow night, you are cut off. Completely. Do not call us when the bank takes everything you own. They turned their backs on me and marched toward their expensive cars. I stood perfectly still, watching the doors slam and the engines roar to life. They peeled out of the cracked parking lot, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. They thought they had given me an ultimatum. They thought they had left me trembling with fear. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed Julian's number. The appraiser answered on the first ring. I told him to accelerate the auction timeline. I needed the full weight of my liquid capital ready to deploy immediately. Then I called the private investigator. I told him to draft a comprehensive whistleblower report detailing Bradley's illegal leverage of my parents' assets. My family wanted to play a game of ultimatums. They wanted to threaten me with bankruptcy while blindly marching toward their own execution. Bradley thought he could use my family to bully me into surrendering the easement. He was about to find out that the broke daughter standing in the dust was holding a loaded gun to his billion-dollar empire. I watched the dust settle in the cracked parking lot long after my parents and my siblings had driven away. My hands were perfectly steady. I had played my part flawlessly. By playing dumb and demanding 48 hours to review their insultingly low contract, I had bought myself the exact window of time I needed. I walked back into the damp office of the convenience store and locked the heavy steel door behind me. I did not need 48 hours to read a standard quitclaim deed. I needed 48 hours to tear Bradley's entire world apart piece by piece. Thanks to the massive wire transfer from Sotheby's that had cleared my account that morning, I no longer had to operate in the shadows. I had capital. I pulled out my laptop and initiated a secure encrypted transfer to a man named Vance. Vance was a former federal forensic accountant who now operated as a private corporate investigator for the wealthiest and most ruthless firms in Atlanta. He did not ask questions. He only delivered results. and he charged a premium for his absolute discretion. I sent him a message containing Bradley's full legal name, his corporate entities, and the Oasis project details. I told Vance I wanted every financial record, every hidden offshore account, and every buried municipal filing associated with my brother-in-law. I told him I needed it by midnight. Vance did not disappoint. At exactly 11:45 that night, a heavy knock echoed through the door of my small apartment. I opened it to find a tall, austere man in a dark trench coat holding a thick leather briefcase. He walked inside without a word, set the briefcase on my cheap dining table, and snapped the locks open. "You were right to be suspicious," Vance said, pulling out a stack of documents bound in thick red rubber bands. "Your brother-in-law is not a titan of commercial real estate. He is a ghost. The man is completely broke." I pulled out a chair and sat down, staring at the mountain of paperwork. "What do you mean he is broke?" I asked. "He drives a $200,000 car. He lives in a penthouse. He is building a billion-dollar mega development." Vance laughed, a harsh, dry sound that carried zero humor. "It is all leased, leveraged, or stolen. Bradley is running a highly sophisticated corporate Ponzi scheme." Vance began spreading the documents across the table, tapping a heavy pen against various highlighted bank statements. He explained the terrifying reality of Bradley's business model. Bradley's last 3 commercial projects in Texas and Florida had been catastrophic failures. He had burned through hundreds of millions in investor capital and delivered absolutely nothing. To avoid going to federal prison for investor fraud, Bradley had started the Oasis project in Atlanta. He was taking the new capital raised for Oasis and quietly funneling it backward to pay off the angry investors from his previous failed ventures. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul. The Oasis project was a house of cards, completely hollow on the inside and waiting for a single gust of wind to knock it all down. But how did a bankrupt developer secure a billion-dollar municipal contract in the first place? I asked, tracing the lines of a city planning document. The city of Atlanta has strict auditing boards. They vet every developer. Vance slid a thick, glossy application folder toward me. They do. But Bradley did not apply as a wealthy white developer. He applied through a shell corporation. Open to page 4 and look at the majority shareholder. I opened the folder. Staring back at me in stark black ink was my father's name, Marcus Washington. "Bradley used your family," Vance explained, his voice dropping to a serious tone. "The city of Atlanta has a highly lucrative government grant program specifically reserved for minority-owned enterprises. Bradley knew he could never secure the Oasis contract on his own merit or with his ruined credit score. So he set up a dummy corporation. He listed your father as the chief executive officer, giving the company a prominent, respectable African-American face. He exploited your family's minority status to bypass the standard bidding process and secure hundreds of millions in diversity grants. He used your parents' race as a corporate shield." A wave of absolute nausea washed over me. My parents paraded around the country club boasting about their brilliant white son-in-law, believing he had elevated their status. They thought he respected them. They thought he admired their success. In reality, he viewed them as nothing more than a convenient demographic loophole. He had weaponized their skin color to commit federal fraud. But the most devastating secret was still hidden at the bottom of Vance's briefcase. He pulled out one final document. It was a bridge loan agreement from a shadow private equity firm. To start moving dirt and making Oasis look like a legitimate construction site, Bradley needed massive initial capital. Traditional banks had already blacklisted him, so he went to the loan sharks, Vance said, tapping the final contract. These private equity lenders required absolute liquid collateral to secure the loan. Bradley did not have any assets left, so he manipulated your parents. I leaned forward, reading the fine print of the collateral agreement. The legal jargon was dense, designed to be confusing, but my training allowed me to cut right through the noise. My heart stopped. Bradley had convinced my father and my mother to legally transfer their entire retirement portfolio into his holding company. Worse, he had convinced them to sign over the deed to their massive Buckhead mansion, viewing it as a temporary corporate guarantee. "If Oasis fails," Vance said quietly, Your parents lose their retirement. They lose their savings. They lose their home. They will be left with absolutely nothing. And Bradley will just file for corporate bankruptcy, shielding himself behind the LLC he put in your father's name. When does the loan default? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of terror and white-hot rage. Vance pointed to the final page. The private equity firm included a strict performance clause. If Bradley does not officially break ground and begin pouring concrete on the Oasis site by the last day of this month, the lenders will instantly seize all collateral. They will liquidate your parents' entire existence. I stared at the calendar on the wall. The end of the month was exactly 9 days away. Everything suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Bradley was desperate. His billion-dollar project was completely landlocked by my gas station thanks to the 1992 easement clause. Because I held the original deed, Bradley could not pave an access road. Without an access road, the city would not issue the demolition permits. Without the permits, he could not break ground. And if he did not break ground in 9 days, the shadow lenders were going to seize my parents' mansion and their life savings. My family had driven to my gas station to offer me a generous bailout. They had called me a failure. They had mocked my clothes and my business acumen. They tried to bully me into signing over my property for a pathetic $150,000, claiming it was an act of charity. They had absolutely no idea that they were completely broke. They had no idea their lavish lifestyle was currently hanging by a thread. They were begging me to hand Bradley the exact weapon he needed to finish stealing everything they owned. I thanked Vance and paid him his remaining fee. When the door clicked shut, I sat alone in the silence of my apartment, staring at the mountain of fraudulent documents. I held the power of absolute life and death over my family's financial future. I could sign the deed and let Bradley continue his Ponzi scheme, delaying the inevitable collapse, or I could hold my ground, block the access road, and watch the banks tear my arrogant family to pieces in 9 days. The choice was mine, and the clock was ticking. I stared at the fraudulent loan documents and municipal filings until the early hours of the morning. I held the absolute power to detonate their entire world. The trigger was right there in my hands. But a small, lingering fragment of the daughter who had spent 30 years desperate for her parents' love hesitated. I needed to know with absolute certainty that they were beyond saving. I needed to know if they would choose my actual life over Bradley's corporate approval. I decided to give them one final opportunity to prove their humanity. If they failed this test, I would burn their empire to the ground without a single ounce of guilt. I spent the next morning calling in a favor from a graphic designer I knew from my previous corporate job. By noon, I had a stack of highly realistic, terrifying medical documents. They detailed a severe, fast-acting neurological condition requiring an immediate, highly specialized, out-of-network surgery. The total estimated cost was $50,000. I washed my face, leaving it completely free of makeup. I pulled my hair into a messy, uneven knot and put on an oversized, faded sweater. Looking pale, exhausted, and genuinely sick, I drove my rusted sedan to my parents' sprawling Buckhead mansion. The contrast between my reality and theirs was sickening. Their driveway was lined with imported Italian cypress trees. A brand-new luxury sports car sat near the fountain, no doubt another one of Bradley's leased gifts. I walked up the marble steps and rang the heavy brass doorbell. My brother Jamal opened the door. He was holding a crystal tumbler of scotch, wearing a tailored linen suit. His smile instantly vanished the moment he saw me. He looked me up and down with blatant disgust. "What are you doing here, Nia?" he demanded, blocking the doorway. "Mom and Dad are entertaining Bradley and Chloe. We specifically told you to only come back if you had the signed property transfer. Please, Jamal." I whispered, forcing my voice to tremble. I let a genuine tear slip down my cheek. "I am not here about the gas station. I need to see Mom and Dad. It is an emergency." I pushed past him before he could stop me, walking straight into the grand, formal living room. The entire family was gathered around the marble fireplace. Bradley sat in the center of the plush leather sofa like a king, holding court, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. Chloe was draped over his arm, showing our mother something on her phone. My father stood by the bar laughing loudly at whatever joke Bradley had just made. The laughter died the second I stepped into the room. Vivian slammed her phone face down on the glass table. Nia, what is the meaning of this? You look absolutely dreadful. We have guests. Could you not have dressed properly before barging into my home? I ignored her insult and walked toward the center of the room. I pulled the fabricated medical documents from my worn tote bag and set them on the glass coffee table. I let my hands shake visibly. I am sick, I said, my voice cracking perfectly. I went to the specialist yesterday. They found a mass. It is aggressive, and the only surgeon who can operate immediately is out of network. My insurance will not cover it. If I do not have the surgery by next week, the damage could be permanent. The room went completely silent. I waited for the panic. I waited for my mother to rush forward and pull me into her arms. I waited for my father to demand the doctor's name and pull out his checkbook. I waited for the basic human reaction any parent would have when told their child was facing a life-threatening illness. Instead, my father picked up the paperwork with 2 fingers, keeping it at arm's length as if the papers themselves were infected. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the numbers. $50,000. Marcus scoffed, dropping the papers back onto the table. That is an absurd amount of money to demand on a Sunday afternoon. Are you sure you are not exaggerating this condition, Naya? You have always had a habit of seeking attention when Chloe is doing well. I stared at him, my heart turning into a block of solid ice. I am not exaggerating, Dad. I am terrified. I need a loan. Just 50,000. I will delay my business plans. I will work multiple jobs the second I recover. Please, I am begging you. Chloe rolled her eyes loudly. Oh, please, Nia, you always do this. Bradley just secured a massive new phase for Oasis, and instead of congratulating us, you barge in here demanding 50 grand for some mystery illness. You just cannot stand seeing me happy. I turned to my mother. Vivian was picking at a microscopic piece of lint on her designer trousers, actively avoiding my gaze. Mom, I pleaded, stepping closer to her. It is my life. I need your help. Vivian sighed heavily, looking at me with pure exhaustion. We do not just have $50,000 sitting in a checking account, Nia. Our money is tied up in important investments with Bradley. You are an adult. You need to start taking responsibility for your own health and your own finances. We cannot always be your safety net. They had never been my safety net, not once in 30 years. That was when Bradley leaned forward. The mastermind of the Ponzi scheme placed his bourbon glass on the table. He looked at me with a predatory, calculating gleam in his eyes. He saw an opportunity. He saw a desperate, sick woman he could completely exploit. You know, Nia, we are family, Bradley said, his voice smooth and dripping with fake empathy. And family takes care of their own. I hate seeing you in this kind of distress. I can write a check for $50,000 right now. I can cover your entire medical bill today. I looked at him, maintaining my fearful, desperate expression. You would do that? Absolutely, Bradley smiled, leaning back against the leather cushions. Under one condition. You brought the quitclaim deed for the gas station, right? You sign over the property rights to my holding company right now, and I will write the check for your surgery. It is a win-win. You get your health back, and I get the overflow parking dirt I need. He was legally holding my life hostage for his real estate development. He was leveraging my supposed physical survival to secure the access road he needed to save his own fraudulent empire. I looked at my parents. Surely this was the line. Surely seeing a man extort their sick daughter for a piece of real estate would snap them out of their delusion. Take the deal, Nia, my father urged, stepping forward and clapping Bradley on the shoulder. Bradley is being incredibly generous. He is saving your life and taking that useless property off your hands. It is a miracle. You really should be thanking him, Vivian added, finally looking at me. Not many brothers-in-law would hand over $50,000 to a girl who has been nothing but rude to him. Sign the paper, Nia. Do not be stupid. The test was officially over. They had failed spectacularly. They had proven beyond any shadow of a doubt that they would gladly let me die if it meant maintaining their proximity to Bradley's wealth. I slowly picked up the fake medical documents from the glass table. I looked at the 5 people in the room, memorizing their greedy, expectant faces. I let the desperation melt away from my posture. I stood up perfectly straight. "You are right," I said, my voice losing its tremor and turning completely flat. "I should not make rash decisions today. I will bring the deed to Bradley's corporate office tomorrow at noon. We can sign all the paperwork in front of your board of directors. I want to make sure everything is perfectly legal." Bradley grinned, a massive, victorious smile spreading across his face. "Perfect. I will have my legal team ready, Senia. This is what happens when you finally stop fighting us and let the adults handle the business." I turned around and walked out of the grand living room without another word. I walked down the marble steps and got into my rusted car. I did not shed a single tear on the drive back to my apartment. The sadness was completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating precision. They wanted a public signing at noon. They were going to get an execution. To fully grasp the absolute finality of my decision, you have to understand the exact anatomy of their rejection. It did not end with Bradley's conditional offer to buy my life with the gas station deed. The true unfiltered venom of my family was unleashed in the suffocating minutes before I finally turned my back on them forever. Before I walked out that door and promised to meet them at noon, they made sure to strip away any remaining illusion of love. When I laid those fabricated medical documents on the glass coffee table, I watched their masks slip. I watched the superficial charm evaporate. I watched the polite society manners burn away, leaving nothing but raw, unapologetic cruelty. Chloe did not just roll her eyes. She actively recoiled. She physically pulled her designer skirt away from my legs as if my supposed illness was contagious. She stared at me with a mixture of pity and absolute revulsion. She called me a manipulative leech. She told me I was trying to drain the family's hard-earned resources simply because I was too lazy to build a real life. She stood in the center of a mansion financed by a Ponzi scheme and lectured me about financial responsibility. Jamal was worse. He stepped entirely over the paperwork scattered on the table, refusing to even glance at the diagnosis. He looked at me with cold, dead eyes. He told me to grow up. He told me to face the consequences of my own sheer incompetence. He said the real world does not hand out participation trophies or free surgeries. He told me that my failure to secure premium health insurance was a personal choice, and he was not going to let his portfolio suffer because I made bad decisions. He demanded I stop embarrassing them in front of Bradley. And Bradley, the architect of their impending doom. He leaned forward, dropping the facade of the generous savior the second I hesitated. His voice dropped into a low, threatening growl. He coldly stated that his money was tied up in real investments. He told me he was not running a charity for stubborn, ungrateful relatives. He made it perfectly clear that his offer to pay for my surgery was not an act of kindness, but a hostile business transaction. When I stared at him in silence, he delivered his final threat. He told me that if I did not sell him the gas station immediately, he would not even bother negotiating anymore. He threatened to weaponize the city's eminent domain laws to seize my property by force. He boasted that he had municipal judges on his payroll and city planners in his pocket. He promised me that if I fought him, the city would condemn my land, take it for pennies, and I would be left with absolutely nothing. Not even enough money to pay for a hospital bed to die in. But it was my mother who delivered the fatal blow, the woman who had given birth to me, the woman who was supposed to be my ultimate protector. When I reached down to pick up the medical bills, my hands legitimately trembling from the sheer horror of their apathy, she marched across the Persian rug. She did not reach out to hold me. She did not offer a single word of comfort. She reached out and violently slapped the papers directly out of my hands. The heavy stock papers scattered across the pristine marble floor, slipping under the expensive sofas, and resting against Bradley's Italian leather shoes. Vivian stood over me, her chest heaving with rage. She screamed that I was ruining Bradley's mood. She screamed that I was a toxic, negative stain on their perfect Sunday afternoon. She demanded I get out of her sight and not return until I was ready to be useful to the family. That was the exact moment the last remaining thread snapped. That was the moment my heart turned completely to ice. I looked at the woman who birthed me. I looked at the man who raised me. I looked at the siblings who shared my blood. They did not see a daughter. They did not see a sister. They saw a liability. The familial bond was not just broken, it was officially dead, extinguished, eradicated. I left the papers on the floor. I stood up, squared my shoulders, and gave them the promise to meet at Bradley's office at noon. I walked out of that mansion for the final time. When I returned to my apartment, the air felt different. My chest felt hollow, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. There was no grief left to process. There were no tears left to cry. The emotional execution had already taken place in that living room. Now it was time for the financial execution. I spent the entire night preparing for the noon meeting. I did not sleep. I did not eat. I operated with the singular, terrifying focus of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. The silence of my apartment was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic hum of my printer churning out page after page of Bradley's ruin. I organized the explosive documents Vance had delivered into crisp black presentation folders. I printed out the fraudulent bridge loan agreements. I printed out the minority-owned business loophole applications bearing my father's forged signature. I printed out the irrefutable proof that Bradley's Oasis project was a rapidly collapsing house of cards. I placed the documents detailing my parents' leveraged retirement funds and the deed to their Buckhead mansion right at the top of the stack. They had slapped my medical bills to the floor. Tomorrow, I was going to slap their financial death warrant onto a mahogany boardroom table. As the sun began to rise over the Atlanta skyline, I walked into my bedroom and opened my closet. I bypassed the faded jeans and oversized sweaters I had worn for years to play the part of the struggling, forgettable middle child. I reached for a sleek, tailored charcoal suit I had purchased with a fraction of my Sotheby's advance. I selected a crisp white silk blouse. I pulled my hair back into a severe, polished style. I applied my makeup with sharp, precise strokes. The woman staring back at me in the mirror was a stranger to my family. She was wealthy, she was powerful, she was untouchable. I packed the black folders into my leather briefcase, alongside the original highly coveted 1992 easement deed, the deed that controlled their entire destiny. I checked my watch. The morning traffic was already building. My family was undoubtedly waking up in their luxurious homes, drinking expensive coffee, and congratulating themselves on finally breaking me. They believed I was coming to the office to surrender. They believed I was coming to sign away my future, to save my own life. They had no idea I was walking in as the executioner. I drove away from this Buckhead mansion, and I did not look back in the rearview mirror. I did not replay their cruel words in my head. I did not wonder if my mother would ever love me. The 30 years of desperate yearning were completely gone. The 30 years of seeking their approval were burned to ash. The 30 years of shrinking myself to fit their narrative were officially over. I felt nothing but a sharp, surgical clarity. At precisely 8 o'clock Monday morning, my phone chimed with a notification from my secure banking app. The funds from the Sotheby's private auction had cleared. $4.5 million sat in my liquid checking account. It was a staggering sequence of numbers. It was complete financial autonomy. It was the weapon I needed to finalize their destruction. I did not go to Bradley's office. I did not go to the gas station. I drove straight to the sleek glass tower in the heart of downtown Atlanta that housed the city's most feared corporate litigation firm. I was not there to hire just any lawyer. I was there to hire Marcus's fiercest rival and Bradley's worst nightmare. Her name was Evelyn Vance. She was a brilliant, high-powered African-American female attorney who possessed a reputation for utterly dismantling arrogant developers in court. Bradley had briefly hired her firm 2 years ago to handle zoning disputes. He fired her 3 weeks later, claiming she did not fit his corporate culture. In reality, Evelyn did not fit his culture of fraud. She had refused to sign off on his legally dubious shell companies. She had seen exactly who he was, and he had tried to ruin her reputation in the local business community to cover his tracks. She had a score to settle. I had an empire to burn. We were the perfect match. Evelyn sat behind a massive slab of polished mahogany, perfectly composed in a sharp navy suit. She looked at me with calculating eyes as I placed my leather briefcase on her desk. I did not offer small talk. I did not explain my family trauma. I simply opened the folders and began laying the documents out in a meticulously organized grid. I laid down the misfiled 1992 easement deed. I laid down the physical municipal boundary maps. I laid down the bridge loan contract detailing the toxic private equity terms. I laid down the fraudulent minority-owned business application featuring my father's forged signature. Finally, I laid down the deed to my parents' Buckhead mansion, legally leveraged as collateral for a Ponzi scheme. Evelyn did not speak for a full 10 minutes. She methodically reviewed every single document. She cross-referenced the municipal maps with the easement clause. She read the toxic loan stipulations. When she finally looked up, a slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. "He is completely landlocked," she whispered, her eyes shining with sudden predatory excitement. "You hold the absolute legal chokehold on a billion-dollar development, and he has exactly 9 days before his lenders liquidate his entire family by marriage." "I do not just want to hold the chokehold," I replied, leaning forward. "I want to snap the neck. They told me to bring the signed property transfer to Bradley's office at noon today. They think I am coming to beg for a $50,000 medical bailout. I want to make sure that by the time I walk into that boardroom, the gas station is legally fortified. I want an unbreakable barricade." Evelyn immediately pressed the intercom button on her desk. She summoned 3 senior paralegals and a junior partner into the office. The room transformed into a war room. Evelyn barked out orders with lethal precision. They drafted an emergency preliminary injunction. They cited the exact municipal statutes protecting commercial easements from unapproved thoroughfare access. They drafted cease and desist orders specifically naming Bradley's Development Corporation, his shell companies, and his primary construction contractors. We made the language bulletproof. The legal filing strictly prohibited any commercial vehicles, any heavy machinery, and any construction personnel from crossing my property line. We added an immediate trespassing penalty clause that would trigger automatic municipal fines and potential arrest for any unauthorized access. We locked the borders of the gas station tighter than a Federal Reserve Bank. Because I had the absolute liquidity of the Sotheby's funds, I paid Evelyn's premium retainer upfront in cash. I authorized her to hire private security contractors to physically enforce the injunction at the property line. Within 2 hours, the legal filings were digitally stamped and registered with the county clerk. The injunction was active. The barricade was legally recognized. Bradley could not move a single backhoe. He could not pour a single yard of concrete. He was entirely paralyzed. Evelyn printed the freshly stamped injunctions and slid them into a pristine black folder. She handed it to me with a look of profound professional respect. "They think they are dealing with a desperate, broken woman," Evelyn said, leaning back in her chair. "They think they hold all the leverage. When you drop this on his desk, his entire corporate existence is going to evaporate." I took the black folder. I felt the heavy, expensive paper beneath my fingers. It was not just a legal document. It was the physical manifestation of my freedom. I checked my watch. It was 11:15. I had 45 minutes to reach Bradley's corporate headquarters. I walked out of Evelyn's office and stepped into the bright Atlanta sunlight. The city buzzed with energy, but my mind was completely still. I slid behind the wheel of my car and turned the key. I did not feel anxious. I did not feel afraid. I did not feel any lingering trace of familial guilt. They had made their choices. They had slapped my fake medical bills to the floor. They had laughed at my supposed suffering. They had demanded my absolute submission. I drove toward the financial district. I navigated the heavy traffic with steady, calm hands. I watched the glass towers of Bradley's corporate kingdom grow larger through the windshield. They were waiting for me up there in their expensive leather chairs. They were waiting for the forgotten daughter to hand over her crown. I parked my car and walked toward the revolving glass doors. The execution was scheduled for noon. I was exactly on time. I walked into the glass boardroom of Bradley's corporate headquarters at exactly noon. Bradley sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, flanked by three corporate lawyers. My parents and Chloe were perched on a leather sofa in the corner, radiating smug anticipation. A pristine contract and a silver pen rested on the table, waiting for my signature. I looked at Bradley's arrogant face. He was completely relaxed, absolutely convinced he had finally broken me. In that split second, I realized that simply handing him Evelyn Vance's injunction in a sterile corporate office was a mercy he did not deserve. A piece of paper would stop his construction, but it would not expose the monster my family worshipped. I needed him to dig his own grave. I needed him to commit an act so egregious, so undeniably criminal, that his entire carefully constructed facade would shatter. So I played the defeated victim one last time. I left the black folder safely hidden inside my briefcase. I looked down at the floor, forced my shoulders to slump, and whispered that I needed 24 hours to let a free legal aid clinic review the terms of the property transfer. Bradley's face twisted into an ugly snarl. He snatched the $50,000 check off the table and ripped it directly in half. He told me my time was up. He leaned across the polished wood and promised me that if I did not sign that exact second, he would take my property by force. He boasted that the city would look the other way when he tore my pathetic little building to the ground. I turned around and walked out in silence. The bait was set. I did not sleep that night. I parked my car in the empty lot of a closed diner directly across the street from my gas station. The air was thick with the humid, suffocating weight of an impending Atlanta summer. Evelyn's private security contractors, dressed in unmarked dark clothing, were already positioned in the shadows around the perimeter of my property. They were strictly instructed to remain entirely invisible and not to intervene until I gave the absolute final signal. I sat in the driver's seat with the windows rolled down, drinking black coffee and waiting for Bradley's desperation to override his common sense. The shadowlenders were circling him. The strict deadline to break ground was suffocating him. I knew he could not wait for the slow legal process of eminent domain. He was going to go rogue. At exactly 5:15 in the morning, the heavy metallic rumble of diesel engines fractured the pre-dawn silence. The ground beneath my tires actually vibrated. I stepped out of my car and leaned against the hood. Two massive, bright yellow bulldozers rolled slowly down the street, their headlights cutting through the early morning fog. They were flanked by Bradley's black luxury SUV. He was not trying to be subtle. He intended to illegally bulldoze my convenience store, clear the dirt, and simply pay whatever minor municipal trespassing fines the city slapped him with later. In the cutthroat world of commercial real estate, developers pulled this illegal maneuver all the time, asking for forgiveness instead of permission once the building was already reduced to rubble. The SUV parked illegally on the curb. Bradley stepped out wearing a tailored trench coat over a designer tracksuit. He looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot and manic. I glanced at the SUV's passenger window. Chloe was sitting inside, scrolling mindlessly on her phone, her face illuminated by the screen's harsh blue glow. She had tagged along to watch her husband destroy my life, treating my absolute ruin like a casual morning errand. Bradley marched up to the property line, signaling the heavy machinery operators to idle their engines. He pointed a gloved finger directly at the front doors of my convenience store, ordering the demolition crew to prepare for immediate destruction. I stepped out of the shadows and walked directly onto the cracked asphalt of my property. I stopped dead center in front of the convenience store doors, placing my body squarely between the brick wall and the roaring yellow bulldozers. I pulled my phone from my pocket, hit the record button, and held it up. The red light blinked steadily in the dim morning air. Bradley saw me and froze. For a fraction of a second, surprise flashed across his face, but it was instantly swallowed by a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. The immense pressure of his collapsing Ponzi scheme, the shadowlenders breathing down his neck, and the sheer audacity of my defiance completely shattered whatever remained of his corporate composure. He stormed across the property line, stopping mere inches from my face. "Get out of the way, Naya," he hissed, spit flying from his lips. "You are trespassing on an active construction site. This is my property, Bradley. I said, keeping the phone lens focused squarely on his face. My voice was perfectly calm. You do not have a demolition permit. You do not have an approved access road. If those machines move one more inch, you are committing a federal crime. He did not just yell. He erupted. The polished, sophisticated real estate titan vanished, revealing the vicious, bigoted predator lurking underneath. He screamed a string of vile, stomach-churning racial slurs directly into my camera lens. He told me I was a worthless, uneducated gutter rat who had no idea how the real world operated. "You think you can stop me?" he roared, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. "You think a pathetic piece of trash like you can block $1 billion development? I own this city. I own the zoning board. And I absolutely own your pathetic social climbing family." He laughed, a harsh, maniacal sound that echoed off the surrounding brick buildings. "You think I married your vacuous sister because I actually care about her? She is a demographic prop. I only married Chloe for the diversity optics. I needed a respectable black face to plaster on my corporate brochures so I could bypass the standard bidding process and steal millions in municipal minority grants. Your parents are nothing but dumb collateral. They were so desperate to secure a white savior for their country club image that they practically begged me to drain their retirement accounts. They signed over the deed to their mansion without even reading the fine print. I am going to bleed them dry, leave them bankrupt in the street, and not lose a single second of sleep over it." I glanced past his shoulder. Chloe had rolled down the passenger window of the SUV to get a better look at the confrontation. The morning air was completely still. She heard every single word. She heard the man she worshipped call her a demographic prop. She heard him use racial slurs to describe her own blood. She heard him gleefully admit to financially ruining her parents and orchestrating the complete theft of their entire existence. I watched the color completely drain from her face. Her phone slipped from her hands. But she did not open the door. She did not step out to defend her parents. She did not scream at him. She just sat there frozen in sheer pathetic cowardice, paralyzed by the terrifying realization that she had traded her soul for a man who viewed her as livestock. Bradley turned back to me, his chest heaving with exertion. He raised his hand and signaled the lead bulldozer operator to advance. "Run her over if you have to," he screamed. "I will cover the legal fees. Tear this garbage down right now." The massive diesel engine roared, the metal tracks grinding against the pavement as the machine lurched forward. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I smiled. I reached inside my jacket and pulled out the crisp black folder. I stepped directly into his personal space and slapped the heavy, legally stamped document squarely against his chest. Bradley instinctively grabbed the folder before it fell. He ripped it open, his eyes scanning the thick legal text. I watched his face shift from homicidal rage to absolute paralyzing terror. "It is a federal injunction, Bradley," I said, my voice cutting through the roar of the engines like shattered glass. "You are legally barred from moving a single commercial vehicle across this property line. And I just recorded you ordering a hit and run, admitting to federal grant fraud and confessing to the financial exploitation of a minority-owned business front. You are not building an oasis. You are going to federal prison." Bradley did not cancel the gala. A true narcissist backed into a corner will always double down on the delusion. Canceling the massive, highly publicized, groundbreaking event would have immediately signaled to his shadow lenders and the city council that the Oasis project was bleeding out. Instead, he chose to completely ignore the federal injunction. He gambled on the arrogant assumption that his sheer momentum and political connections would somehow crush my legal barricade before Monday morning. The groundbreaking gala was held the very next evening. He had erected a massive climate-controlled white pavilion directly on the cleared dirt of the Oasis site, less than 50 yards from my barricaded gas station. The sheer audacity of the event was staggering. Valets parked lines of Maseratis and Bentleys along the cracked pavement of the industrial district. Inside the pavilion, it was a masterclass in superficial opulence. Silk drapery hid the canvas walls. Massive crystal chandeliers were suspended from the temporary steel rafters. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated through the crowd, carrying trays of beluga caviar and perfectly chilled vintage champagne. A string quartet played softly in the corner, entirely masking the hum of the heavy diesel generators outside. I walked through the entrance completely unbothered and entirely uninvited. My tailored charcoal suit allowed me to blend seamlessly into the sea of wealthy investors and corporate executives. I stayed in the shadows near the back of the tent, sipping a glass of sparkling water and watching my family put on the performance of a lifetime. The facade of the perfect wealthy family had reached its absolute dizzying peak. My father Marcus was the center of attention. As the legally documented chief executive officer of Bradley's fraudulent shell corporation, Marcus was absorbing the praise of the entire room. He wore a custom velvet tuxedo and held a lit Cuban cigar, laughing uproariously with the mayor of Atlanta and two prominent city council members. He was boasting loudly about his brilliant vision for urban renewal. He took full credit for the architectural designs and the community impact studies. He puffed out his chest, utterly intoxicated by the respect of the city's elite, completely oblivious to the fact that he was confessing to federal grant fraud in front of half the local government. A few feet away, my mother was holding court with the wives of the primary investors. Vivian was absolutely dripping in diamonds. A heavy diamond collar rested against her collarbone, and massive diamond chandeliers swung from her ears. I knew for a fact that every single stone had been collateralized by the loan sharks. She smiled warmly, touching the arm of the mayor's wife, and loudly complaining about the exhausting burden of managing generational wealth. She boasted about Bradley's genius, claiming that her brilliant white son-in-law had learned everything he knew about real estate from her family. She was practically vibrating with smug superiority, completely blind to the guillotine swinging down toward her neck. Jamal was working the room with the aggressive desperation of a man trying to secure a seat on a sinking ship. He handed out heavily embossed business cards to anyone who made eye contact. He introduced himself as the Vice President of Acquisitions, a title he had entirely invented for the evening. He spoke confidently about global supply chains and luxury asset management, using buzzwords he had clearly memorized from a podcast. He was a pathetic caricature of a successful businessman. But it was Chloe who fascinated me the most. My beautiful, cruel, superficial sister looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and hastily glued back together. She stood next to the 10-foot ice sculpture of the Oasis logo, wearing a breathtaking scarlet gown. But the illusion stopped at the fabric. Her face was pale beneath a heavy layer of contouring makeup. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, wide and panicked. She gripped her champagne flute so tightly her knuckles were completely white. Chloe had heard every single word Bradley had screamed at the gas station. She knew he considered her a meaningless demographic prop. She knew he only married her for the diversity optics required to steal city funding. She knew he had financially destroyed our parents. But the terrifying prospect of losing her penthouse, her sports car, and her country club membership was stronger than her sense of self-preservation. She had chosen to swallow the abuse. She had chosen to stay silent and play the devoted, adoring wife out of pure, unadulterated cowardice. When the event photographer approached, she forced a wide, hollow smile, pressing herself against Bradley's side, as if she had not heard him plot her family's absolute ruin just 36 hours prior. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The low murmur of the wealthy crowd faded into an expectant silence as the mayor of Atlanta stepped up to the acrylic podium at the front of the pavilion. He tapped the microphone and smiled brightly at the audience. He spoke about progress. He spoke about the revitalization of the district. And then he introduced the men of the hour. He called my father and Bradley to the stage, praising them as a shining example of diverse family-driven corporate excellence. The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. Marcus practically sprinted to the stage, waving to the investors like a conquering hero. Bradley followed, projecting an aura of calm, humble success. He shook the mayor's hand and stepped up to the microphone. Bradley delivered a masterful, sickening speech. He thanked the city council for their unwavering trust. He thanked the investors for their vision. He placed his hand on his heart and gave a deeply emotional tribute to his father-in-law, praising Marcus for being the guiding light of the Oasis project. He looked directly at Chloe in the front row and called her his rock, his inspiration, and the love of his life. The press cameras flashed furiously, capturing the pristine image of the ultimate Atlanta power family. Ushers quickly brought 4 silver-plated shovels to the front of the stage. The mayor, Bradley, Marcus, and Jamal gripped the shovels, posing for the ceremonial groundbreaking photo. They smiled brightly, preparing to dig into the ceremonial trough of dirt imported specifically for the stage. They had reached the very top of their mountain of lies. They were breathing the thin, intoxicating air of absolute delusion. They believed they had won. I stood in the back of the pavilion watching the flashbulbs illuminate their greedy, smiling faces. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. The higher they climbed, the more devastating the fall was going to be. And it was finally time to pull the floor out from under them. I set my glass of sparkling water down on a passing waiter's silver tray. It was time. I pulled my phone from my pocket and sent a single blank text message. Less than 10 seconds later, the heavy canvas flaps at the rear entrance of the massive VIP pavilion were dramatically thrown open. The soft, elegant melodies of the string quartet were instantly drowned out by the deep, aggressive, reverberating roar of a twin-turbo engine. A pristine chauffeur-driven midnight black Maybach rolled directly into the event space, stopping perfectly at the very edge of the plush red carpet. The entire pavilion went dead silent. The mayor of Atlanta stopped clapping. The wealthy investors craned their necks, their champagne flutes hovering near their lips. The flashbulbs of the local press corps swung away from the stage and aimed directly at the idling luxury vehicle. The uniformed chauffeur stepped out and smoothly opened the rear passenger doors. Evelyn Vance emerged first. She looked absolutely lethal in a sharp burgundy trench coat, carrying her signature black leather briefcase like a weapon. Then I stepped into the blinding glare of the event lighting. I was not wearing the faded, oversized clearance rack sweaters my mother used to force upon me. I was wearing a custom-tailored razor-sharp charcoal designer suit that fit me with immaculate precision. A pair of vintage Cartier diamond earrings caught the light as I moved. I projected an aura of absolute, undeniable, and staggering wealth. I did not look like the forgotten, pathetic family scapegoat coming to beg for an invitation. I looked like a corporate titan arriving to execute a hostile takeover. Evelyn and I walked shoulder to shoulder down the center aisle of the pavilion. We moved with synchronized, predatory grace. The crowd of Atlanta elite instinctively parted for us, a ripple of frantic whispers following in our wake as they desperately tried to place my face among the city's power brokers. As I approached the front rows, the facade on the stage began to fracture. Vivian's jaw dropped so fast, it was almost comical, her manicured hands flying to her chest in sheer disbelief. Marcus actually fumbled his ceremonial silver shovel, the metal clattering loudly against the wooden stage. Jamal looked terrified, his eyes darting toward the exits as if looking for a place to hide. Chloe shrank behind the massive ice sculpture, her face turning the color of ash. Bradley's fake, humble smile melted into an expression of sheer panic. He recognized Evelyn Vance instantly. He knew exactly what her presence meant in a room full of his vulnerable financial backers. I did not pause. I did not ask for permission. I ascended the carpeted stairs to the main stage with measured, deliberate steps. The mayor of Atlanta looked thoroughly bewildered, stepping back and glancing between me and Bradley for an explanation. Bradley lunged forward, his hands grasping frantically, intending to physically block my path to the podium. Evelyn intercepted him with terrifying speed. She stepped directly into his path, squaring her shoulders and leveling him with a stare so cold it stopped him dead in his tracks. You lay a single finger on my client in front of these cameras, Bradley and I will have you in federal handcuffs before the appetizers are served. Evelyn stated, her voice carrying an unmistakable edge of violence. Bradley froze, his fists clenching impotently at his sides. I stepped smoothly around him and walked directly up to the clear acrylic podium. I reached out and pulled the microphone right out of Bradley's sweating, trembling hand. I did not look at my family. I looked out at the sea of wealthy investors, city officials, and local reporters. While I held the room's attention, Evelyn walked purposefully over to the terrified audiovisual technician sitting at the side of the stage. She placed her black leather briefcase on his table, opened it, and handed him a small silver flash drive. "Put it on the main screens immediately," she ordered. The technician, too intimidated by Evelyn's commanding presence to refuse, plugged the drive into his master console. The massive digital screens flanking the stage flickered. The glowing opulent Oasis logo vanished completely. It was replaced by a massive high-resolution scan of a legal property deed overlaid with a bright red, freshly stamped federal injunction. A collective gasp echoed through the pavilion. The press corps surged forward, their cameras firing at a blinding pace to capture the legal documents projected behind me. "Good evening, Atlanta," I said, my voice echoing through the massive speakers, perfectly calm, steady, and razor-sharp. "My name is Nia. I am the sole legal owner of the commercial property sitting exactly 50 yards from the entrance of this temporary pavilion. You have all been invited here tonight to celebrate the groundbreaking of the billion-dollar Oasis development." I gestured gracefully toward the massive screens behind me. What your host Bradley conveniently failed to mention during his deeply touching speech is that this entire project is built on a geographical and legal impossibility. I pressed a small presentation clicker Evelyn had placed on the podium. The screen transitioned from the legal deed to a highly detailed municipal zoning map of the industrial district. The Oasis property was outlined in bright, pulsing red. It was a massive island of dirt completely surrounded by existing industrial structures. I pointed directly at the screen. As you can clearly see on the verified municipal zoning map, the Oasis development is entirely landlocked. It does not share a single border with a public road. It is geographically trapped. The only legal access route, the only physically possible path permitted for heavy construction machinery, commercial transport vehicles, and foundational equipment to enter this site, runs directly through my commercial property line. I pressed the clicker again. The map zoomed in, highlighting my specific property deed in bright blue, showing exactly how it choked off the entrance to Bradley's massive dirt lot. Bradley's entire development strategy relies on a grandfathered 1992 municipal easement. I continued, my voice echoing over the growing, frantic murmurs of the crowd. That specific easement requires the explicit, legally binding written permission of the property owner to be utilized for any form of commercial development or construction access. I gripped the edges of the acrylic podium and leaned forward, looking directly into the eyes of the primary investors sitting in the front row. I have not granted that permission. In fact, I am permanently, legally, and irreversibly denying access. The document currently displayed on the screens behind me is an active, federally mandated injunction. It legally bars Bradley, his corporate shell companies, his primary contractors, and any associated construction personnel from moving a single vehicle across my property line. The silence in the pavilion was absolute. It was the terrifying vacuum-sealed silence that precedes a devastating explosion. I looked at Bradley, who was hyperventilating, his hands shaking violently at his sides, as he realized his entire empire was evaporating in real time. I looked at Marcus, who was gripping his shovel like a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood. I turned my attention back to the captivated audience. "Heavy machinery cannot fly over my building. Concrete trucks cannot teleport onto this dirt. Without my access road, a single bag of cement cannot be poured on this site. Without my access road, this supposedly premium land is nothing but an entirely worthless, inaccessible crater. The Oasis project is legally dead. You are all standing in the middle of a billion-dollar graveyard." The collective gasp from the audience sucked the oxygen out of the massive pavilion. For a split second, nobody moved. The high society crowd was frozen in a tableau of absolute shock, champagne flutes, suspended in mid-air eyes, darting from my face to the glowing federal injunction projected 50 feet high on the screens behind me. Then the sterile corporate silence shattered into a deafening roar. Investors leaped from their gold Chiavari chairs, shouting furious questions toward the stage. The press corps surged forward like a tidal wave, completely abandoning the designated media area, their cameras firing in a blinding, relentless strobe to capture the legal documents. Bradley lunged at me. He did not move with his usual polished corporate grace. He moved with the frantic, uncoordinated panic of a cornered predator. "Give me that!" he roared, clawing at the clear acrylic podium to physically rip the microphone from my hands. I stepped back smoothly, twisting my body just enough to evade his grasp while keeping a firm hold on the heavy metal mic. "She is completely out of her mind!" Bradley bellowed, his voice cracking with raw desperation as he turned to face the sea of panicked financial backers. "Do not listen to a single word she says. She is a delusional broke college dropout. She has been trying to extort my company for months because she is insanely jealous of her sister's success." He pointed a shaking, sweating finger at the massive digital screens. He pointedly refused to actually look at the legally binding federal injunction blazing in red ink. "That is a forged document. It is a complete fabrication. We have absolute legal clearance. We have the permits. We have the city's backing. She has absolutely no money and no power. This is a pathetic shakedown by a bitter, estranged relative." The investors in the front row were not buying his frantic performance. I watched wealthy men in tailored suits furiously dialing their legal counsels. They recognized the unmistakable scent of a dying deal. Then my family reacted. They did not turn their anger toward the man who had just confessed to stealing municipal funds and bankrupting them. Their conditioning ran too deep. Their profound addiction to the illusion of wealth completely overrode their basic sense of self-preservation. Marcus and Vivian scrambled up the carpeted stairs of the stage, their faces contorted with unhinged fury. My father's custom velvet tuxedo suddenly looked absurd as he marched toward me, his face purple with rage. "What are you doing?" Marcus screamed, spit flying from his lips. He did not ask if the injunction was real. He did not ask if Bradley had lied to them. "Have you completely lost your mind? You are ruining everything. You are destroying our reputation in front of the entire city. Get off this stage right now." Vivian grabbed my arm. Her manicured nails dug painfully into the sleeve of my custom designer jacket. She yanked me backward, her eyes wild with a familiar, terrifying panic. "You spiteful, jealous little girl," she hissed, her voice vibrating with pure malice. "You could not stand to see Chloe happy. You could not stand to see this family succeed. You are a disgrace. You are an absolute embarrassment." She released my arm and turned to the crowd, her hands fluttering in a frantic, desperate display of appeasement. "Please, please excuse my daughter," she pleaded to the sea of shocked faces and flashing cameras. "She has always been unstable. She has always been a bitter, deeply troubled girl. We are handling this. Please enjoy the champagne." I stood perfectly still. I did not pull away. I did not raise my voice. The more they screamed, the calmer I became. The surgical clarity I felt in Evelyn's office had crystallized into solid ice. I watched them unravel. I watched the blinding greed consume them. Jamal took the stairs 2 at a time. He marched directly up to me, using his heavy, muscular frame to block my view of the audience. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, attempting the exact same physical intimidation he had used to bully me since we were teenagers. He flared his nostrils, trying to project absolute aggressive dominance. "You are going to walk out of here right now, Nia." Jamal growled, his voice a low, threatening rumble meant only for my ears. "You are going to take your little fake papers and you are going to disappear before I physically drag you out to the curb. You are not going to cost me this deal. Do you hear me?" He raised his large hand, reaching for my shoulder to physically force me toward the stairs. "Do not touch me, Jamal," I stated. My voice was a soft whisper, but it carried a lethal, freezing edge that made him pause mid-motion. "If you lay one hand on me in front of these cameras, you will leave this pavilion in handcuffs." Jamal hesitated, his eyes darting toward the press pool. The flashing cameras were capturing every second of the family meltdown. The journalists were not packing up their equipment. They were furiously recording the spectacular implosion of Atlanta's newest power family. Marcus shoved past Jamal. He pointed a trembling finger at the floor beneath my feet. "You are going to fix this," Marcus ordered, his voice dropping to a vicious, commanding hiss. "You are going to get on your knees, and you are going to beg Bradley for forgiveness. You are going to tell these people you made a mistake. You are going to hand over whatever fake deed you have, and you are going to beg your sister to forgive you for trying to ruin her night. I looked at Marcus. I looked at the man who had demanded my absolute submission for my entire life. I looked at the man who had willingly sacrificed my future to secure his own temporary comfort. I am not begging anyone for anything, I replied evenly. Vivian stepped forward, tears of pure rage streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. If you do not stop this right now, you are dead to us. Nia, she screamed, completely abandoning her polished socialite persona. You will have no family. You will have nothing. We will cut you out completely. You already did, I replied calmly. You cut me out the day you demanded I sacrifice my business to fund a fraud. You cut me out the day you threw my medical bills on the floor. You cut me out the day you chose his money over my life. Bradley shoved Marcus aside, stepping back into the center of the confrontation. He was sweating heavily, his designer trench coat suddenly looking suffocating. He tried to regain his commanding executive persona, but his eyes darted wildly like a trapped rat. Listen to me, you stupid girl, Bradley sneered, lowering his voice so the investors could not hear. You think a single injunction stops me? I have an army of lawyers. I have millions in capital. I will tie you up in litigation for the next decade. I will bankrupt you. I will bury you in court fees until you are living out of a cardboard box. You have no money. You have no power. You are completely out of your league. Drop the injunction, sign the transfer deed right now, and I might write you a check for $10,000 just to make you go away. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I did not show a single trace of the fear they were so desperately trying to provoke. I looked at their panicked, greedy faces. I absorbed their threats, their insults, their absolute, unwavering denial of the reality staring them in the face. They were clinging to a sinking ship, demanding I patch the holes with my own bare hands. I turned away from my family. I turned away from Bradley. I looked past the podium, locking eyes with Evelyn Vance. She was standing at the edge of the stage, perfectly composed, watching the chaotic implosion with clinical professional satisfaction. I caught her eye. I simply nodded. Evelyn Vance did not hesitate. Her fingers moved rapidly over the audiovisual console, bypassing the terrified technician completely. The massive digital screens behind me blinked. The red federal injunction vanished, replaced instantly by a pristine, high-definition scan of a certified financial statement from Sotheby's International Realty. The logo was unmistakable. The name at the top of the account was Niobe, Washington, and the available liquid balance, printed in bold, undeniable black ink, was exactly $4.5 million. I leaned into the microphone, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating tension of the pavilion. You just offered to write me a check for $10,000, Bradley, I said, allowing a cold, razor-thin smile to finally touch my lips. That is fascinating, because according to my legal team, you do not have $10,000 to your name. In fact, if you attempt to write a check from any of your corporate accounts right now, it will immediately bounce. The collective gasp from the audience was louder this time. The wealthy investors in the front row, the men and women who had poured their fortunes into Bradley's charismatic promises, suddenly looked physically ill. They stared at my bank statement, the irrefutable proof that the woman Bradley had just dismissed as a broke, delusional dropout possessed more liquid capital than his entire proposed development budget. Bradley's face drained of all color. The arrogant, condescending sneer he had worn for years completely dissolved, replaced by the hollow, sunken stare of a man watching his executioner drop the blade. He took a stumbling step backward, his designer shoes catching on the thick black microphone wire. Evelyn hit the next button on the console. The screen shifted again. This time it displayed a dense, heavily highlighted forensic financial audit. I turned my attention directly to the investors, speaking with the clear, authoritative cadence of an executive briefing her board. The document you are currently looking at is a certified forensic audit of Oasis Development Partners, one announced, ensuring every word echoed clearly to the very back of the tent. It was compiled by an independent federal investigator over the last 72 hours. Bradley does not have millions in capital. Bradley is entirely irreversibly bankrupt. He has been running a sophisticated real estate Ponzi scheme to cover the catastrophic losses from his previous failed ventures in Chicago and Miami. The millions of dollars you invested in this project did not go toward land acquisition or construction materials. He embezzled every single cent to pay off his shadow lenders and maintain his personal illusion of wealth. Chaos erupted in the front rows. A prominent city councilman stood up, his face purple, shouting for security. Two of the primary investors bypassed the ushers and stormed toward the edge of the stage, screaming at Bradley, demanding their money back. Bradley shrank back, holding his hands up in a pathetic gesture of surrender, shaking his head rapidly as if he could simply deny the documents out of existence. But I was not finished. I had to deliver the final fatal blow to the family that had stood by and cheered while he tried to bury me. I pressed the presentation clicker. The screen split into two separate documents. On the left was the corporate charter for the Oasis project. On the right was a series of complex loan agreements. To the mayor and the city council members present tonight, I continued, my voice rising over the clamor of the angry crowd. I advise you to look closely at the corporate charter. Bradley deliberately structured this entire enterprise to exploit federal and municipal grants earmarked for minority-owned businesses. He appointed my father, Marcus Washington, as the chief executive officer. He used my family's minority status to fraudulently secure millions in city funding. He legally isolated himself from the corporate liability, meaning when the federal investigators arrive tomorrow morning, my father is the one legally responsible for the millions of dollars in missing grant money. Marcus dropped his ceremonial silver shovel. It hit the stage with a sharp, echoing clang. He stared at the massive screens, his eyes wide and unblinking, his chest heaving, as the reality of his situation violently shattered his delusions of grandeur. He was not a respected corporate titan. He was a disposable legal shield for a con artist. He was going to federal prison. Vivian let out a sharp, breathless keen, her hands clutching her diamond necklace as if it could somehow protect her. But the final slide I had prepared was meant specifically for her. I clicked the button one last time. The screens shifted to display a series of heavily redacted banking transfers and a secondary property deed. And for my family, who was so quick to defend this man's honor, I suggest you review the collateral he used to secure his final round of shadow loans, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register that somehow cut through all the shouting in the pavilion. Bradley secretly remortgaged the Washington family estate 3 months ago. He forged Marcus's signature on the transfer documents. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings exactly 48 hours ago. Your mansion is gone. I turned my eyes toward my brother, who was standing frozen on the stage, his fists still clenched, his tough guy facade completely annihilated by the sheer scale of the financial ruin raining down on him. And Jamal, I added coldly. You should check the balance on those offshore investment accounts Bradley promised to manage for you. He completely drained your life savings last week to pay for the white canvas tent we are all currently standing inside. You are entirely broke. The collapse was absolute. Vivian's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the carpeted stage, letting out a raw, guttural scream of pure despair. The diamonds around her neck, the designer gown, the years of ruthless social climbing, it was all gone. She was destitute. Jamal staggered backward, pulling his phone from his pocket with shaking hands, frantically swiping at the screen, desperately trying to log into accounts that I knew were already empty. He let out a choked, animalistic sob when he saw the zero balances. Chloe, my beautiful, cruel sister, finally stepped out from behind the ice sculpture. She looked at Bradley, the man she had allowed to financially assassinate her own parents, just to maintain her penthouse lifestyle. She looked at the screens, proving he had stolen everything. She did not scream. She simply stared at him with wide, hollow, horrified eyes as the crushing weight of her own cowardice finally caught up to her. Bradley was trapped. He was completely surrounded by enraged investors demanding their money and a family he had just plunged into absolute ruin. The facade was dead. The empire was ashes. I stood at the podium perfectly untouched by the carnage, watching the flames consume them all. The nod I gave Evelyn Vance was the final trigger. Bradley saw it. He looked from Evelyn's cold, satisfied smile back to the damning financial documents illuminating his complete ruin. The calculating, smooth-talking developer vanished entirely. What replaced him was a cornered, venomous creature stripped of all pretense. The investors were closing in on the stage, demanding their millions. Bradley snapped. "Get away from me!" Bradley roared, his voice cracking as he violently shoved Marcus backward. Marcus stumbled, his arms flailing, and crashed hard onto the wooden floorboards. Bradley realized he could not charm his way out of this. He had only one move left to save himself from the immediate wrath of his financial backers. Total deflection. He turned his manic, bloodshot eyes toward the crowd, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger directly at my father. "You want someone to blame?" Bradley screamed. "Look at the chief executive officer. Look at the man who happily signed the grant applications. Look at the idiot who authorized every single transfer." Marcus scrambled to a sitting position, raising his hands in a pathetic defense. "You told me to sign them." Marcus stammered, his voice weak. "You said it was standard procedure. You said we were partners." Bradley let out a bark of deranged, vicious laughter. "Partners? You honestly thought we were partners, Marcus? You are a gullible pawn. You are an arrogant, financially illiterate prop." Bradley paced the stage like a caged animal, addressing the shocked crowd. He did not read a single document. He signed whatever I put in front of him because he was too obsessed with feeling important. He wanted the country club memberships. He wanted to shake hands with the mayor. I gave him the title, and he happily sold his own soul for it. He is the one legally responsible for the missing municipal funds. I was merely an advisor. Vivian let out a strangled wail from the floor. She lunged forward, grabbing Bradley's ankle. "We gave you everything," she cried. "We trusted you. You are a monster." Bradley kicked his leg free with violent disgust, looking down at my mother with absolute revulsion. "You gave me exactly what I needed, Vivian. You gave me your perfect diverse demographic cover. You were so desperate to climb the Atlanta social ladder, you practically handed me the keys to your estate. Do not stand there and play the victim. You collateralized your own home to fund a lifestyle you could not afford. You let your greed blind you. You signed the secondary mortgage papers right alongside your husband. You dug your own grave." The crowd watched in absolute horrified silence as the picture-perfect Washington family was butchered by the man they had worshipped. Chloe finally moved. She lunged toward Bradley, grabbing the lapels of his ruined coat, tears streaming down her contoured face. "Bradley, please," Chloe begged, her voice high and desperate. "Tell them it is a mistake. You are my husband. You love me." Bradley gripped her wrists and violently threw her off him. She stumbled hard, her heels catching on the carpet, landing awkwardly next to our mother. "Love you." Bradley spat the words out like poison. "You are a human accessory, Chloe, a demographic requirement for my loan applications. Do you think I actually wanted to listen to your vapid, empty conversations for the last 2 years? Do you think I actually cared about your endless shopping sprees? You are a gold digger who was too stupid to realize the gold was already gone." He sneered at her, stepping closer so his voice echoed over the microphone I still held. "You happily ignored every single red flag because I bought you a penthouse and a sports car. You stood there and smiled while I systematically drained your parents dry just as long as your credit card kept working. You are exactly like them. Greedy, pathetic, entirely hollow." Chloe let out a raw, devastated shriek of total humiliation. She curled in on herself on the floor, hiding her face in her hands, as the press cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing every agonizing second of her public destruction. He broke her. He broke her completely. He broke her without a single trace of hesitation. Jamal stood paralyzed, his jaw working silently, completely incapable of processing the reality that he had been played for an absolute fool. The tough guy facade was gone, replaced by a terrified broke boy. The illusion was atomized. The elite crowd of investors and politicians, the very people Vivian and Marcus had spent their entire lives trying to impress, were staring at them with unadulterated disgust. The Washingtons were not victims in the eyes of Atlanta high society. They were complicit, greedy fools who had dragged the city's power brokers into a massive federal fraud scheme. The social execution was complete. Bradley, chest heaving, looked wildly at the exits. He had successfully thrown his human shields under the bus. He believed he had bought himself a small window to run. He turned toward the rear of the stage, ready to bolt into the night. Then the sound cut through the cold evening air. It started as a faint, distant wail echoing through the industrial district. Within seconds it multiplied, growing louder, sharper, and utterly undeniable. The piercing shriek of heavy sirens. Red and blue lights began to pulse violently against the white canvas walls of the VIP pavilion, bleeding through the fabric and illuminating the horrified faces of the crowd. Evelyn Vance stepped up beside me at the podium. She smoothly closed her black briefcase. "Forensic accounting is a beautiful thing," Evelyn stated, her voice calm and conversational over the approaching sirens. "I submitted the full audit of Oasis Development Partners to the federal authorities exactly 2 hours before this gala began. They were highly motivated by the scope of the embezzlement." Bradley froze at the edge of the stage, his eyes wide with absolute terror. The heavy canvas flaps at the main entrance were ripped open. Dozens of agents in dark windbreakers emblazoned with the letters FBI poured into the pavilion. They moved with swift tactical precision, fanning out across the room and locking down every single exit. The mayor immediately stepped away from the stage, raising his hands to show compliance. The investors backed away, leaving a wide, empty circle around the stage. The federal agents marched straight down the red carpet, their boots heavy against the floorboards. My family remained clustered on the stage. Marcus was staring blankly at the approaching agents. Vivian was sobbing hysterically into her hands. Chloe was rocking back and forth on the floor. Jamal was backing away slowly until he hit the acrylic podium, and Bradley stood paralyzed, his empire of lies finally collapsing under the crushing weight of reality. I stood tall, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the podium. I had not laid a single hand on them. I had not raised my voice. I had simply handed them the rope, and they had eagerly, greedily tied their own noose. 6 months is a remarkably short time for an empire to turn to dust, but federal indictments move with brutal efficiency. My new corporate headquarters occupied the top 2 floors of the very building Bradley had once tried to illegally acquire. The view from my floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed panorama of the Atlanta skyline. I stood looking out over the city, a steaming cup of coffee in my hand, listening to the quiet, methodical hum of my own thriving enterprise. Bradley was currently occupying a 6-by-8-foot federal cell, serving a 20-year sentence for wire fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. The spectacular implosion of Oasis Development had triggered a massive, inescapable chain reaction. Jamal was immediately terminated from his boutique finance firm the morning after the gala. Nobody on Wall Street wanted a junior executive whose name was directly tied to a highly publicized federal Ponzi scheme. He was blacklisted from the industry entirely. Chloe's designer wardrobe, her imported handbags, and her luxury sports cars were swiftly seized by the IRS. She was currently working a minimum-wage retail job at a suburban outlet mall, hawking discount cosmetics. Her wages were aggressively garnished to pay down the massive mountain of shadow debt Bradley had legally attached to her name before he went down. My intercom buzzed. Evelyn Vance, who had transitioned from my attorney to my chief operating officer, spoke with a clipped professional tone. "Nia Security just flagged a group in the lobby. They bypassed the front desk and slipped into the executive elevator. It is your family. Send them in," I replied, turning away from the window and taking my seat behind my heavy mahogany desk. The heavy oak doors to my office swung open. They did not march in with the arrogant, commanding presence they once wielded. They shuffled. They looked exactly like what they were: broken, desperate people who had finally run out of other people's money and other people's patience. Marcus wore a suit that was visibly frayed at the cuffs, the fabric hanging loosely on his diminished frame. Vivian's roots were showing, her posture completely collapsed, the polished socialite persona entirely evaporated. Jamal avoided my eyes entirely, staring at the floorboards. Chloe stood at the back wearing a cheap polyester uniform from her discount kiosk, her face pale, exhausted, and stripped of all its former haughty contouring. Vivian started crying the second she crossed the threshold. "Nia, please," she sobbed, attempting to approach my desk. with her hands clasped together in a posture of desperate prayer. I held up a single hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Stand exactly where you are," I ordered, my voice stripping the room of any remaining warmth. "We have nowhere else to go," Marcus stated, his voice stripped of all its former booming authority. It sounded thin, reedy, and pathetic. "The bank formally finalized the foreclosure this morning. The marshals gave us 48 hours to vacate the property. We are being thrown onto the street. We have absolutely nothing left." Vivian wiped her face, her eyes darting around my pristine, expensive office. "You are our daughter," she pleaded, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "You are our flesh and blood. Blood is thicker than water, Naya. We made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but you cannot just abandon us to the wolves. We are family. Family takes care of family." Marcus cleared his throat, attempting a sad, hollow shadow of his old negotiating tone. "You have the capital now," Marcus reasoned, gesturing weakly. "We saw the Sotheby's statements. We read about your new acquisitions in the business journals. You can buy the estate back from the bank before it goes to auction. You can pay off the outstanding liens. It is a drop in the bucket for you now. You can fix this. You can save us." I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers together. I looked at the 4 people who had happily watched me bleed, who had actively participated in my destruction just to maintain their own comfort. "Blood is thicker than water," I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the sterile air of the office. "That is a fascinating quote, Vivian. Do you know the actual original proverb? It is the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means the bonds we actively choose to make are infinitely stronger than the people we simply happen to share genetics with." I dropped my hands to the desk, leaning forward. "You do not get to invoke family now that your bank accounts are empty. You did not care about family when you demanded I sacrifice my business to fund a fraud. You did not care about family when you threw my medical bills on the floor. You did not care about family when you stood on that stage 6 months ago and screamed that I was a bitter, unstable embarrassment." I looked directly at my sister. Chloe flinched, shrinking back toward the heavy doors. "You spent your entire life mocking my work ethic, Chloe," I said coldly. "You laughed at me for building a real company while you married a con artist for his credit card. Now you are learning exactly how much an hour of actual labor is worth." I shifted my gaze to my brother. "Jamal, you tried to physically intimidate me into signing away my life. You tried to bully me into submission so you could play finance bro with stolen money. Now you cannot even secure an interview as a bank teller." Finally, I looked at Marcus and Vivian, the architects of my lifelong misery. "You allowed a criminal to steal my legacy to fund your country club memberships. You threw me to the wolves long before the wolves ever came for you. You willingly signed those secondary mortgage papers because your greed was louder than your common sense." "But I am your father." Marcus choked out a tear, finally spilling over his weathered cheek. "You cannot do this. You are my biological donor," I corrected with absolute surgical precision. "Evelyn Vance is more of a family to me than you have ever been." I reached over and pressed the silver button on my intercom. "Evelyn, please have security escort these visitors out of the building. If they resist, have them arrested for trespassing." Vivian let out a piercing wail, falling to her knees on the expensive rug. "Nia, please. We will do anything. We will work for you. Please do not let them take our home." "It is not your home anymore, Vivian," I stated, opening a fresh file folder on my desk, entirely dismissing their presence. "It belongs to the bank. Enjoy the retail shifts, Chloe. Enjoy the eviction, Marcus. Do not ever set foot in my building again." The heavy oak doors opened. 2 towering security guards stepped into the office, their expressions unyielding. Jamal did not fight. He grabbed his mother by the arm, hauling her to her feet, his spirit completely broken. Marcus stared at me one last time, searching for a single ounce of the submissive, desperate daughter he used to control. He found absolutely nothing but ice. They were marched out of the office in absolute silence. The heavy doors clicked shut, sealing them out of my world forever. I picked up my pen, turned to the first page of my newest acquisition contract, and went back to work. I watched them leave exactly as they had treated me. like strangers. The sound of the wrecking ball striking the rusted steel canopy of the old gas station was the loudest, most beautiful noise I had ever heard. I stood on the dusty sidewalk in a hard hat and a high-visibility vest, watching decades of neglect shatter into a million jagged pieces. The impact sent a massive cloud of gray dust billowing into the warm Atlanta air, but I did not blink. I did not step back. I did not look away. I watched the heavy machinery tear down the final physical reminder of my family's relentless mockery. That dilapidated corner lot, the exact property my mother had called a disgusting eyesore, was being leveled to the ground. It was not an act of destruction. It was the first violent stroke of creation. I had not just been sitting on the capital I secured. I had been quietly, methodically executing a master plan that Bradley and Marcus were too arrogant to ever conceptualize. When Oasis Development officially collapsed under the crushing weight of federal indictments, the massive landlocked acreage directly behind my gas station went into immediate foreclosure. The bank was desperate to liquidate the toxic asset. Because I owned the only viable access point to the main boulevard, the land was functionally useless to any other major developer. I purchased the entire 40-acre plot through a blind holding company for absolute pennies on the dollar. Bradley had used that land to sell a fraudulent fantasy. I bought it to build an empire of concrete glass and undeniable reality. Over the next 18 months, I transformed that massive expanse of dirt into exactly what Bradley had falsely promised the city. But I did it without embezzling a single dime. I navigated the zoning boards legally. I secured municipal permits through flawless, transparent proposals. I hired local contractors demanding fair wages and exceptional craftsmanship. The rusted gas station and the empty fields behind it were replaced by the Vanguard Community Complex. It was a sprawling, innovative, multi-million-dollar development designed to actually serve the city rather than exploit it. The architecture was breathtaking. We built sleek, modern pavilions utilizing sustainable materials, massive windows that flooded the interiors with natural light, and wide-open green spaces planted with native Georgia flora. But the true beauty of the complex was not in its design, but in its purpose. Half of the real estate was dedicated to an advanced community center, featuring a subsidized tech incubator for underprivileged youth, a modern health clinic, and a sprawling public library. The other half was commercial space specifically reserved and strictly priced for minority-owned small businesses. I created a thriving economic ecosystem where local entrepreneurs could actually afford to operate without being crushed by predatory rent. Today was the grand opening. I stood in the center of the main plaza, the warm, late-afternoon sun casting long golden shadows across the pristine paving stones. The atmosphere was absolutely electric. Music drifted from the outdoor speakers, mingling with the sound of hundreds of people laughing, talking, and celebrating. Local vendors were already operating out of their sleek new storefronts. A line stretched out the door of a newly opened artisanal bakery. Tech students were gathered on the expansive green lawns with their laptops. The space was alive. It was breathing. It was everything my parents had claimed I was completely incapable of producing. I looked at the people standing directly beside me on the main stage. Evelyn Vance stood to my right wearing a sharp-tailored navy suit. She had formally resigned from her corporate law firm to become my full-time chief operating officer. She was brilliant, ruthless, and fiercely loyal. To my left stood the lead architect, the primary contractor, and the newly appointed director of the community center. We were laughing, sharing quiet jokes as the crowd continued to swell. This was my chosen family. There was no toxic competition. There was no underhanded manipulation. There were no hushed conversations about who was failing or who was embarrassing the bloodline. We were bound by mutual respect, shared vision, and the absolute certainty that we had built something magnificent together. The mayor of Atlanta, a different man from the one Bradley had fooled, stepped up to the podium. He delivered a resounding, passionate speech about integrity, community investment, and the power of legitimate, hard-earned vision. When he called my name, the applause that erupted from the crowd was deafening. It was not polite country club applause. It was a roar of genuine roaring appreciation from the people whose lives were actively being improved by this complex. I stepped forward, taking the microphone. I looked out over the sea of faces. I did not see Marcus. I did not see Vivian. I did not see Chloe or Jamal. Their absence was not a void in the crowd. It was the very reason the air felt so incredibly light. They tell you that success is the best revenge, I said, my voice carrying clear and strong over the plaza. But that implies your actions are still dictated by the people who hurt you. True success is not revenge. True success is rendering those people entirely irrelevant. We stand today on ground that was once discarded. It was called worthless. It was called a dead end. But we knew that value is not determined by those who lack the vision to see it. We took what was abandoned and we turned it into a foundation. This complex belongs to you. It belongs to the builders, the dreamers, and the people who refuse to let anyone else dictate their worth. Evelyn stepped forward, handing me a pair of massive ceremonial gold scissors. A thick, vibrant red ribbon was stretched across the main entrance of the community center. I grasped the handles, the cool metal solid and heavy against my palms. I looked at Evelyn, who gave me a sharp, proud nod. I closed the scissors, slicing cleanly through the thick silk. The crowd erupted into cheers. Confetti rained down from the upper balconies, flashing silver and gold in the sunlight. The Vanguard Community Complex was officially open. The empire was cemented. As the official ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed to explore the new facilities, I quietly stepped away from the main plaza. I walked down a quiet landscaped path that led toward the western edge of the property. I stood at the railing, looking out over the city as the sun began its final descent. The Atlanta skyline was bathed in spectacular shades of bruised purple, burning orange, and deep molten gold. The vibrant light reflected off the massive glass windows of the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. I took a deep, slow breath, filling my lungs with the cool evening air. I felt no lingering anxiety. I felt no lingering need to prove anything to anyone. The hopeless failure they had mocked for 30 years was gone. The hopeless failure they had tried to bury had bought the graveyard and built a sanctuary over it. In her place stood a woman who owned her narrative, owned her territory, and owned her future. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, standing completely alone, and for the first time in my entire life, I was totally, undeniably free. The ultimate lesson from this story is that your worth is never defined by those who fail to see it, even if they are your own family. True success and security must come from within. When faced with a toxic environment, blatant favoritism, and profound betrayal, the most powerful response is not seeking petty revenge. It is building your own undeniable independence. Blood does not guarantee loyalty, and you are never obligated to sacrifice your future to subsidize someone else's greed. By establishing unbreakable boundaries and focusing on your own growth, you can transform your deepest pain into your greatest, most untouchable triumph. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic situation to build your own success, share your story in the comments below and please hit like and subscribe for more stories of resilience.